Yes, well, I agree with your other guest up to a point. Um, Israeli concerns in Syria, I would say, are exclusively or largely defensive, whereas Turkish, viewed from Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, Turkey, or more particular President Erdogan, may have more offensive interests in Syria when he's spoken about kind of neo-imperial Ottoman ambitions. For Israel, Israel is already fighting a seven-front war, and that includes with the Houthis in Yemen, for example, West Bank, Hezbollah, the remnants of Hezbollah in Lebanon, and so on. Israel does not want more hostile forces on its border with Syria. And Israel is also wary because in the past, Israel believes that President Erdogan has assisted various Islamist groups, including the Islamic State, allowing them movement of weapons and personnel into previous, ISIS-controlled areas in Syria. So the last thing Israel wants is Turkey to control the border zone next to Israel and allow in various Islamist groups, and therefore Israel will feel even pinned in even more on yet another border by hostile forces.
Dilara, do you agree with Tom Gross's evaluation that Israeli actions are revolving around this defensive mentality, so that they are acting sort of preemptively, they're defending their own interests, whereas Turkey is more sort of offensive in that regard? And does Turkey see any danger in Israeli presence in Syria as long as Turkish interests are concerned?
I agree partly, but I do not believe that the Turkish presence is there on an offensive aim, because the two actors are actually currently trying to bolster their positions, because both have actually deep-rooted mutual suspicions right now with each other's aims in Syria, while Israel is having concerns about Turkey's links with Islamist groups, such as we have seen in the case of Hamas. Turkey is hosting and supporting Hamas, but also some groups in Syria that have these kinds of backgrounds and also still ties to them. On the other hand, Turkey's concerns and suspicions about Israel in Syria is more about Israel's potential links or relations with the YPG terrorist organization, or what some might call Kurdish groups. So now that is feeding mutual suspicion on both sides, because in Syria, Turkey's current goal is to get rid of the SDF, the YPG issue completely. And Turkey is therefore also supporting the recent deal between Ahmet al-Shara and SDF commander Mazlum Kobani. But as we have said previously, the arena of the both sides in Syria is completely different, actually, and I do not therefore predict any direct confrontation, but we will see such continued of suspicion and mutual exchanges of words in the future.
Yeah, quite often we notice that the barbs, were exchanged. This interaction is quite complicated, of course. Tom Gross, what do you make of that view that Turkey is worried about potential Israeli connection, Israeli communication with SDF, which is dominated by YPG, and YPG, according to the Turks and many other sources, of course, is considered to be just the Syrian wing of PKK, which is, as I understand, has been sort of officially disbanded or in the process of being disbanded.
Well, historically, Israel has had some relations with the Iraqi Kurds, but has been very careful not to have too many close relations with the Syrian or Turkish Kurds, precisely because Israel and Turkey have, by and large, enjoyed relatively good relations by Middle Eastern standards over the decades. So, Israel has, for example, not interfered to the level that it might have done on behalf of the Turkish Kurds, in the same way that, for example, Israel has been very, very reticent, reluctant to support Armenian historical grievances against Turkey. Israel has not, has wanted good relations with Turkey. They have not shared a land border. They have quite a lot of mutual interests as two essentially democratic powers in the Middle East. At least they're democratic compared to almost every other country in the Middle East, as two countries that are both Middle Eastern but also part of the West, enjoy good relations with the United States and so on, economic, political, and elsewhere. What we see in Syria is the potential emergence of a de facto border between Turkey and Israel, which we haven't seen to date, if both parties have military powers inside Syria. I don't think Israel is interested in becoming involved in the Kurdish issue in Syria or in Turkey unless the Turkish government continues to assist Hamas and other groups that are vowing to destroy Israel, in which case Israel may threaten to assist the Kurds as a kind of disincentive for the Turkish government to assist Hamas.
And when you say de facto Turkish-Israeli border, you mean that de facto border inside Syria?
I mean that Israel. Israel, one of the reasons Israel and Turkey have by and large enjoyed good relations, not always, but by and large, is because they actually don't have that many points of contention. They have various, in the past, a lot of intelligence cooperation, economic cooperation that continues, political cooperation. They're both democracies and so on, and they don't have any land dispute with each other. If there is, however, potential for friction if they are Turkish-controlled Islamist forces approaching the Israeli border. Then, for the first time, there would be a potential threat from Israel's point of view directly on the border.
Dilara, Aslan, the United States, the position maintained by the United States is of great import here. It has been reported that Israel has been lobbying the United States to curb Turkish presence in Syria, and Turkey also trying to convince everybody, including the United States, that they are not threat to Syria, to Israel inside Syria. So there's a growing confrontation and also claims and counterclaims involving these two actors. And Prime Minister Netanyahu is currently on a visit to the United States. What will be the position that will be expressed by the United States?
Yes, the United States has been actually involved in the Middle East process, especially after the October 7 attacks on Israel. But now it is expected that the US will act as a mediator between its NATO ally, Turkey, and its strategic ally in the Middle East, Israel. Because we haven't seen this action in the past few weeks, despite the tensions, because the new administration under Donald Trump was preoccupied with more internal and other external issues and couldn't give its focus to this issue. We haven't seen any significant announcements or statements on this issue, but now, as you mentioned, with the visit and underground and background diplomacy and intelligence meetings between the officials of the three countries, we can expect that the US will try to find a middle ground between the two countries, because initially, actually, all three parties were on the same page for the Syria file. Neither the US nor Israel nor Turkey wanted a growing Iranian influence in the country. This is why the post-Assad situation in Syria is actually pragmatic for all the three actors. But after that, unfortunately, we saw that tensions had been growing. So the US will try to find, again, try to get these two actors on the same file, because the US has actually, with Israel, worked on decreasing Iranian influence throughout the region. We have seen the defeat of mostly Hamas, of Hezbollah. Even the Houthis have been getting their share. And now also in Syria, we have seen that Iran has been weakened after it has lost its main ally, Assad. So underground, on the fundamentals, we are also actually seeing that both Israel and Turkey are on a more advantageous position here, and the US will try to find now the middle ground here.
Tom Gross, what do you think will be the set of actions taken by the United States? It looks like the containment of Iran, in relation to which both Turkey and Israel agree and concur, and actually the United States also have the same view. But what will be the role played by the United States, bearing in mind what's happening there in Syria?
Well, yes, as was just pointed out, Prime Minister Netanyahu will meet later today in Washington with Donald Trump. It's already his second visit to Washington. I think he's the first foreign leader to visit Trump twice since Trump came back to power in late January. And although ostensibly they're going to talk about tariffs and Trump's moves on tariffs, definitely they will also be talking about Iran. I just might point out as well that Israel also has a narrower interest, which is very important, which is Syria's chemical weapons. As I'm sure everyone will remember, President Assad used chemical weapons against his own population during the civil war. And President Obama, as he then was, after President Obama had threatened to strike Assad for breaking his so-called red line, Assad concluded an agreement with an international body to remove chemical weapons. Not surprisingly, Assad was not telling the truth, and many chemical weapons have remained. And even though Israel immediately after Assad's fall last November made airstrikes on various chemical weapons plants, we heard only a day or two ago that there were at least 100 locations within Syria where chemical weapons remain. So from Israel's point of view, having been attacked by thousands of rockets from Lebanon, Gaza, Iraq, and Syria, and Yemen over the last year and a half, Israel is very concerned about the existence of chemical weapons in Syria. So yes, it's true, as your other guest pointed out, that certainly Israel and Turkey share a common goal in Iran not being too powerful, and Israel is obviously relieved that Hezbollah is less powerful than it was, and Iran is less powerful than it was because its ally Assad is no longer in power. Nevertheless, Israel is in no mood to take risks with the security situation in Syria.
Dilara, Aslan, of course, Turkish-Israeli relations are not just about, say, President Erdogan and Prime Minister Netanyahu, but it's also, of course, it would be fair to say that the political leaders, and bearing in mind the personality factor and the elements of charisma, of course, the political leaders are also the ones setting the tone in the bilateral relations. How much current modern Turkish-Israeli relations are actually about the relationship between these two figures, personalities, today?
Actually, the relations between the two countries have been largely positive when we look at history. Since the establishment of the Israeli state, Turkey was one of the first states to recognize Israel. And we have also, of course, seen some ups and downs throughout history between the two countries. But indeed, especially trade relations and intelligence sharing relations have been continuing for the most of the time, despite these political upheavals. So what we have seen recently is the tensions have been rooted in several factors. The leaders have been, of course, very influential in this because President Erdogan is a voice of criticism against Israel in the Gaza file, especially. This has both domestic issues rooted in domestic issues, as well as in ideological ones, because Erdogan was in the recent elections very much criticized for not taking a stronger stance against Israel. So he had to raise his voice because of internal politics too, but also there is the ideological factor. That Erdogan tries to position himself as the leader of the Muslim world and the regional leader. So, and we see that his criticism is not mostly on the Israeli people, but on Mr. Netanyahu himself. So the influence of the leaders is very influential in the current tensions that we have seen here. But I see a potential for pragmatic re-engagement in the future if both sides are satisfied with some kind of steps that can be taken to decrease these tensions, such as a permanent ceasefire in Gaza or the halting of military steps there, increased humanitarian aid, or a role for Turkey maybe in the post-construction of Gaza. So there is always, as I see, the potential that relations can get back on track despite the harsh words of the leaders that we see today.
Tom Gross, I would like to pose the self-same question to you.
Yes, well, I would agree with pretty much everything that was just said. There's one thing I might add, which is that while Turkey was, let's say secular elements in Turkey had more power, the relations were better. Erdogan, as I understand it, replaced various people in the Turkish intelligence services, secularists with more religious Islamist figures, and those figures are less close, or they work less closely with their Israeli counterparts. So already for some years, the level of intelligence cooperation has not been as close. There is also the problem of Hamas. It's the Israeli policy that Hamas should no longer be a political force, or maybe should no longer exist. And Qatar, Hamas's other main backer, seem to be curtailing the power of Hamas and working with Israel up to a point. The question is, if Qatar expels Hamas, as they might at the end of this war, would the Turkish government provide a new home for Hamas? If that's the case, it will greatly affect positive relations between Turkey and Israel. So we'll have to see. Other than that, I think the two countries, as has been pointed out, have enjoyed pretty good relations for many decades, and there's no reason that wouldn't continue in the future.
Yep. Dilara, Aslan, Tom Gross, I'm very grateful to both of you. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.